Welcome to the Discovery Pod, where we talk to leading experts from the University of Adelaide about solutions to society's most pressing challenges. We're living in a digital age, curating our own digital lives. And while it has many benefits, it can also make us vulnerable to foreign states, threatening our democracy. I'm joined today by Associate Professor Tim Legrand from the University of Adelaide's Department of Politics and International Relations. He's an expert in global blacklisting and sanctions, cybersecurity and critical infrastructure, terrorism, political violence, and political exclusion. So Tim, that sounds like you've got a lot on your plate and you know about a lot of different topics. Let's start with cybersecurity. Can you explain to us what that actually means or what it looks like for the everyday Australian?
Sure. So cybersecurity refers to generally keeping ourselves, our data, our networks and our computers safe from bad guys online. So out there, we've got a lot of malicious actors and countries and groups all seeking to get some sort of commercial advantage or political advantage in cyberspace. And they can use a variety of means to extract that sort of advantage from your devices, from the data that you have, or from networks that you operate on, and so on.
Right, okay. So that has quite a bit to do with information warfare, doesn't it?
That's right.
Can you describe that link?
Yeah, so we live in an age where our lives, the public lives, the government's operations, commercial operations, society and the economy are becoming increasingly digitised. So we've had, 20, 30 years in which this process of becoming a digital society has ramped up and become amplified. And as that has become more kind of active, that our lives and our society has become dependent. We say, there's your social life, my social life, but my banking, the way you kind of get to work. It's increasingly kind of digital systems are running the show. And that has a load of benefits, So there's a lot of efficiencies that we can derive from this new digital age. But one of the vulnerabilities that comes with that is that goes to the capacity that states can now use that reliance that we have on digital processes against us. There's some vulnerabilities that our society has, our states has, because of our reliance on digital systems. And so information warfare refers to the ways in which malicious states out there can use our reliance on digital technologies against us for their own purposes.
So would you say we're in the midst of that warfare right now?
We're probably at the beginning of it.
Right, okay. So it's only going to get more complicated.
It's only going to get bigger, more complex, and potentially more damaging as we go on, or depending on how we respond. Governments are increasingly aware of this vulnerability. So as we ourselves develop better defensive technologies to these problems, we're also, the Australian government is also developing its own offensive technologies to do the same to other countries. So hence the notion of warfare. Wars are fought between countries. And so it's in this space that we're seeing increasingly this back and forth of new technologies being created as offensive technologies. And then we're also seeing defensive technologies being developed to counter those. Right.
So do you think it's possible that we're going to all need to go back to the paper lifestyle soon?
It was definitely a simpler time, wasn't it?
Yeah, it seems
when we just
like it.
read a newspaper in black and white, so that couldn't change before our eyes and is less likely to be manipulated.
Yeah, all the accounts on paper and all our information. It's messy though.
Those were, so it said, a less efficient time, where things were, where processes were administered slower and perhaps required more manpower or womanpower to kind of, administer and keep the society and the economy going. There's a load of benefits that have come with this digital age. We're more connected than ever. We're globally connected. We've got our links with our family, our friends overseas. My family are in the UK. So the digital age has benefited me because I can now, FaceTime them. I can use Facebook to keep up with what's going on with my family. There's a whole range of benefits that go with this digital age, but there's a trade-off.
Of course.
There's, some potential risks that go with it.
Yeah. So can you describe your research into this area?
Yeah, so I work here at the University of Adelaide with Dr. Melissa Ellen Dowling, and together she and I have been doing some research on the vulnerabilities of what we call digital democracy.
Right.
So digital democracy refers basically to the way in which us, the public, engage with our representatives in Canberra and at the state level. Okay. So how our government operates on our behalf is increasingly becoming digital. Indeed, how we elect or understand the voting environment is increasingly digital. So political campaigns are increasingly run through social media and through the popular media, orthodox media as well, of course. The way in which government reaches out to us and delivers our services. Mm-hmm. Our driving licence here in South Australia, for example, is now a digital licence, where you can get it as a digital app on your phone. So all these services, the way government does things for us is increasingly digital. And so democracy now is taking on this new electronic form. Okay. The way government tells us what's going on, and the way we say, yep, government, you're doing a good job, we'll vote for you again. Or indeed, we say, government, we think you're doing a bad job, because we've seen on our social media feeds, different stories about how you've perhaps been rorting the system or there's corruption, so we'll vote against you. Yeah. So the lifeblood of democracy, where once was perhaps much more about face-to-face conversations, and perhaps even TV and radio, is now increasingly what we call disaggregated. There's multiple channels of information available to us through social media that allows us to form different sorts of views on politics of today.
Right. So I know that a huge part of democracy is the ability for each individual in our country to form autonomous decisions about who they want in power and who they want representing them. And what does this digital information and the influence of media have on our ability to make those informed but personal decisions?
Well, this goes to this question of, the threats, what we see as the threats to digital democracy. And you're right, of course, that democracy relies on an informed citizenry. Once you turn the age of 18 in Australia, you're expected to vote. And to vote means to express a preference at the ballot box. And Australia was the innovator of the secret ballot, which is now spread worldwide. And in many ways, we can claim to be one of the great contributors to democratic processes. And so delivering a vote means that an informed vote means that we've arrived at our own judgments of the candidate or political party that we think best represents our personal interests. That's democracy. Now, in a digital age, the amount of information that floods into our consciousness on a day-to-day basis is far in excess of how it used to be. And probably our subconscious. And indeed our subconscious. And we should definitely come back to that. Yeah. So being political means, our mobile phones are very political devices. The social media streams that we buy into, like Instagram or Twitter or Facebook and others, they're not just a way in which we connect to other people, it's a way in which we connect to politics. And those new dynamics now offer up a new way in which our political decision-making, our consciousness, our vote, can be shaped, can be manipulated by people who perhaps have ulterior interests at heart. Would you say that those people are in the political circles themselves or even external to that? Very much. So domestically, all political parties are reaching out through digital media. And that's legitimate to the extent that it's transparent, that we can see that they're doing it. Why not send me an advert onto my Facebook feed to tell me your policies if you're the Labour Party or the Liberal Party? It's just a form of communication, It's a form of legitimate communication, to the extent that we can see that they're doing it. Now, this whole subconscious thing is interesting because there's also a growing ecosystem of agencies and interests out there that covertly try and manipulate our political preferences by their use of online media and online advertising, but also through understanding what it is that makes you and I tick. They collate, Facebook is the great example of this, Their business model is essentially to get as much detailed information on its users as possible, from their age, their gender, where they live, where they work, their education, what their purchasing preferences are, their sexuality, their gender identity, their class. the colour of the clothes that they wear, the places that they go at night, where they go shopping during the day, everything. A totality of the information that makes up you is sucked into social media. And they use that as a means to create very detailed profiles. And they sell those profiles to advertisers. So advertisers see detailed information on individuals as a gold mine for their advertising. The better they know their customer, the more effectively they can sell their products. So, when we're on Facebook or on Twitter or wherever, that data, we're consuming what we are doing is we're social beings. So we're consuming social information. But the platform, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they are using that information to create better profiles to sell to their customers. And their customers are advertisers. We are the producers.
Okay. Coming back to that political conversation, obviously, especially in recent times, it's been quite obvious that places like social media and general media have been places that have inspired a lot of divide between people, which has, in some cases, been quite dangerous. Would you say that that's something we need to be really aware of?
Very much, yeah. So the effect I think that you're referring to is of social media bubbles.
Right, yeah.
That we tend to, when you're on Twitter or Instagram, we tend to affiliate ourselves and follow people who represent our views or kind of represent something like an ideal sort of life that we like.
Yeah.
That's what you do.
Influences.
Influences. Exactly. You're like, hey, that's the sort of lifestyle that I like too. And we follow those, and we populate our, you might say, curate our social media world. We make choices about what we see according to what we want to see. Now, that's a human instinct, isn't it? We surround ourselves with friends who are like-minded.
It validates your own experience as well.
Precisely. It validates our own experience. But the effect of that is to create bubbles.
Echo chambers, as me and my friends call it.
Indeed, echo chambers is a brilliant word. So it's the idea that you only hear the views that reflect the views that you've already selected in the people that you like.
Right.
You never hear antagonist views or alternative views. And so the effect is that you rarely see meaningful debate between people in online circles because they think, well, the world that I know is surrounded by all these people who've got very sensible ideas about the world. And I don't understand what it is to have a different viewpoint in politics. And that creates what we call polarization.
Yeah.
Potentially a society in which people move away from each other's, move away from engaging with one another and hold polarizing views. And they're self-affirming as well because you're surrounded with people who think like you and talk like you and look like you. Yeah. And so why wouldn't that world be the right world for you to choose? And it means that you generally don't have as much empathetic understanding of those who have alternative life views or life experiences or politics.
Right. It also means you can't really safely voice a different opinion. I'm just thinking about situations in which perhaps there's been a photo or a post and I may have a different view to what that's portraying, but I know that everyone who follows that person is within that echo chamber, and then it would just be me against a whole realm of people.
Well, that's why there's a real kind of problem with online bullying, and I mean that would invite a pile on Twitter or on Facebook, and people just jump on you and castigate you, and there's a mental health issue there as well. Yeah, certainly.
Right. Okay, so that's a lot of information, digital information. How did you personally develop a passion in this area?
Well, in my background, I did a PhD in the UK in politics, and I came to Australia and worked at a centre of excellence in policing and security. And part of that was looking at critical infrastructure and how critical infrastructure has increasingly become digital and exposed to the risks of the digital world, especially from other states.
Right.
Arriving here at Adelaide, that interest in how society was structured digitally and has invited new sorts of vulnerabilities, sort of evolved into an interest into the threats that we see to digital democracy. And so myself and my research partner, Dr. Dowling, we've engaged with a whole range of external bodies, the Cybersecurity CRC, the Cooperative Research Centre, and the Department of Defence and Department of Home Affairs are all interested in how our digital democracy has become, not only just become a thing that we engage with, but also has become a vulnerable thing.
Yeah, totally.
And so my interest kind of evolved into this question of, well, how is it that foreign states or non-Australian entities can use our dependence on digital processes against us? All these preferences I've just articulated, all this, the way in which our social worlds are vulnerable to, us basically being identified and categorized for advertisers, but also then in turn vulnerable to being used, that information is then vulnerable to being used against us, to manipulate our preferences. So it's been kind of like a movement from the fundamental digital processes of critical infrastructure, roads, telecommunications, banking, our food security and so on, into societal, a holistic view of how society itself is digital and vulnerable because of that digital aspect.
Yeah, right. And so what brought you to Australia to do that, as opposed to staying in the UK?
Well, it's the position that I acquired at Griffith University at the Centre of Excellence in Policing Security, and they advertised a position, and I was lucky enough to secure it.
Oh, brilliant. How do you like Australia?
That's fantastic. I'm now Australian.
Yeah.
I'm a recent Australian, so I can now refer to the we and the us,
Yeah, good. Yeah, totally.
Democracy, sausage and all that. Yeah, it's a brilliant country.
Yeah. What was the first thing you noticed that was different moving here?
The tea is awful.
Yeah, I've heard. I was actually born in the UK as well.
Ah, well, so we can both
talk about tea together.
Indeed, indeed.
Yeah. So it would be amazing to hear your thoughts on how we as individuals can respond to all of this information, and how do you think we should be aware and then act in response? Yeah,
there's a lot of sophisticated ways in which marketing operates today. And so, in the social world, we're not often aware of how our data is being used to profile us, but then we're even less aware of actually how commercial entities use that data to advertise back to us. Now, my concern isn't so much as a security specialist. My concern is, the integrity of Australia's democracy. So I'm not so concerned with how the advertising for commercial benefit happens, but I'm concerned with how the manipulation of our digital environment occurs and harms our democratic environment.
Yeah, of course.
So, specifically, we know that there's companies out there, such as Cambridge Analytica. Now, that's now a defunct company. What they did and what they had done for the past 10, 15 years is use social media profiles as a means to develop very sophisticated political campaigns all over the world, in Trinidad, Tobago, and across the Caribbean, in Nigeria, in Kenya, in North America, in the United States, in the UK during the Brexit campaign. These companies use our social media data in a way to develop political messaging which tells you what your preferences should be. And manipulates your environment to make you think that certain things are perhaps more of a problem than they really are. I'll take an example. So I think it's 2015, in Nigeria, there was a presidential election, and the incumbent, Jonathan Goodluck, was facing off against a rival candidate who was Muslim. And Cambridge Analytica were engaged by the Nigerian, by Jonathan Goodluck to run his digital campaign. And they ran a very sophisticated and malicious campaign against the Muslim candidate, spreading the fake news, as it turned out to be, that this Muslim candidate was endorsing Sharia law and was essentially on the side of the extreme
So they're inciting
Islamists.
fear and...
Cynically inciting fear, and Jonathan Goodluck won the election. But the use of that data was, is cynical and was a clear manipulation of how people thought that their interests would be best represented. So the Christian candidate on the one hand versus the Muslim candidate on the other. And they've done this all over the world, and they're now defunct because of their a lot of their operations were illegal, and they're found to be in breach of all sorts of regulations. Now, we'd be foolish to think that that's not happening now and today. That our data, your data, and my data on social media is being used is available in more fine-grained detail than ever before, and even to the extent they know what our preferences are online, where we live and where we go, where we socialise. And so I would urge that anyone who is of a digital generation, anyone who's I'm one of the oldest millennials. I'm an 80s child. And, the new generations who are basically digital natives can't escape this. You've been profiled, and your profiles are being sold everywhere. And it's important for us to develop critical faculties when it comes to the information that's being presented to us in our social media bubbles or our echo chambers, as you put it. Being aware that the world is a very diverse place, not holding to firm opinions. I think the mark of someone who's a mature and sophisticated thinker is someone who's open to changing their mind and having a changeable mind, but being critical of the information that's been given to you. Here at the university, I teach all my students to have, to critically engage with information, no matter where it comes from on the political spectrum, and to not be certain of your views. There's an importance to having some fundamentals about about racial equality
and values,
and your values, and and understanding what is good and what sort of things that you want to see in the world, but also being amenable to other people's opinions, and not necessarily buying into what you see online, because what is given to you online is highly tailored to be convincing to you. Especially by sophisticated sort of corporate entities, but also in politics as well. So we see a whole range of new news stories from alternate news agencies, the non-Channel 9 or ABC sources, but of disaggregated social media landscape means that there's a whole range of different perspectives on the world that can be presented to us. And I'd urge everybody to be cynical and not take everything on face value, but to ask yourself the question, at all costs, who is telling me this, and why are they telling me this story? Why are they trying to depict or convince me of a certain perspective?
Asking why, it's such a simple question, is so helpful.
It's a powerful question.
It is. Why. And all of this data gathering, I find it quite helpful when I'm looking for the winter's next puffer jacket, but certainly when you're making big decisions and your voice and your vote matters, you do need to be really aware of the messaging that's being forced upon you sometimes.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, thank you so much. I'm sure that our listeners on the Discovery Pod will have learned just as much as I did today. I'm very grateful for your hard work, and I feel a lot more confident that there are people who are passionate about guiding our leaders and our government to know that this is a very real issue. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Isobel.
Thanks for listening to the Discovery Pod, brought to you by the University of Adelaide. Join us next time when we discuss endometriosis and PCOS.